Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Complaints and Conduct Committee. If I do drop off the call, Colette will let attendees know, and we'll pause the meeting because we'll then not record it until we get back on the call. And we do have apologies from Katharina Casper, and it's for that reason that I'm very pleased to chair the meeting. And Colette, do we have any other apologies other than Katharina? We have Raymond Brown from PERC, and Phil Chapman will be attending with Elias, so welcome. Any declarations of interest or connections? Nope. I've not been notified of any other business, so unless anyone wants to notify me just now, then we'll have none. So in accordance with our standing orders, can I invite members to agree to take items 9 to 13 in private? And then if we move on to the minutes of the last Complaints and Conduct Committee, are members content to approve the minutes? Thank you very much. And the public minute of the private meeting, people content to approve that as well, the 6th of June. In which case, can we move on to the action log, please? So we're keeping on the first action in terms of works going on with key stakeholders and suggesting that a more detailed update will come to November 2024. Are people content with that? Okay. Right, so I'll just move my screen around. Apologies. So right, 002 in terms of the future reports. We're proposing that's ongoing. And then our next 003 included on page 8 of the public report. People content to close this? Okay. 004, we've got the link to the audit report shared following the meeting, so that's proposed to close as well. As is the PERC annual report in terms of PSD overseeing coordinating implementation of the recommendations. So we're proposing to close that. Members can let me know if they're wanting any change to this. Professional boundaries provide a more detailed private report of domestic review findings. So this is presented under item 12. Whether or not it is sufficiently detailed, I'm wondering whether, and I'm happy to ask my colleagues, Katrina, I'm suggesting we do close it, and if there's anything else we want, because we do have more detail, anything else we want, we can then have that as a new action. People content with that? Okay, then 007.
Sorry, Chair, but Darren's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, I can't see. Thank you, Katrina. Darren.
Apologies, Chair. It was just in relation to the earlier one on PERC recommendations. I think there was a little bit of confusion around about the what was referred to there. So just for clarity, it was in relation to recommendations arising from statutory referral investigations, and it was simply around about, as you'll see from the report today, there are an outline of recommendations made in the Police Scotland response, but there are some instances where the Police Scotland response isn't included, but it's still within time to do that, and it was simply just to ensure that subsequent reports captured the response when it was available. So I think there was a little bit of confusion about what was intended there. So it was just to clarify.
Okay, so what are you suggesting in terms of closing or not closing the action?
Yeah, I mean, I think if PERC are content that it is just simply, I think the discussion last time was just ensuring nothing fell through the cracks, that the committee was cited on the Police Scotland response to all of these. If PERC are content that, like with the report today, where there are instances where the recommendation response isn't provided yet, but obviously clearly still in time, that when the next report comes, it provides that update.
Okay. Thanks,
Chair,
Dan.
I've got Helen Harrison and Phil Chapman who both want to come in.
Okay, Helen, then Phil. Thanks. Right.
I guess I was just keen to come in and just provide the reassurance in respect of, obviously sometimes it's to do with the timing in which when the reports are written. So I recognise there's two recommendations. Both of these refer to recommendations raised in June, which is obviously shortly before these reports were written. But we will always try to provide or bring verbal updates to the meeting in terms of just providing the reassurance in terms of the work through that's happening within the recommendations. So I just wanted to give the committee that reassurance.
Thanks for that. Phil?
Thanks, Chair. Just to confirm that we will keep the recommendations on, track them until they're completed, and the narrative will be provided that we get back from the police before they're concluded at this meeting.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much indeed. So, professional boundaries, second action then about complainants, whether they've been notified or not, and guidance being produced. So we've had some advice from Helen there. Any people content to close? Okay. So we're going back to February meeting, which is interesting that things are ongoing since then. So in terms of the February meeting 001, we're looking for a deep dive. So we're keeping that as ongoing, but once we get the date on that, so hopefully by November we can close. 002. There's quite a big update. I'm wondering if I can invite Chief Super Harrison. I don't know if you want to talk us through the update for this, because it's quite lengthy and we're proposing to close it.
Yes, so I think some of these updates have been kind of covered previously at other meetings, just around our sort of user satisfaction survey and how we work through that. And it was just to really kind of conclude that by saying we now include the information on page 11 within our public reports. So we were hoping that with the inclusion of that now moving forward in terms of the user satisfaction survey, that would give the reassurance in terms of closing this action.
Okay. Colleagues content? Yep, thank you very much. So then the 003, we've got the paper under item 11 and the public action log updates. This is, we're proposing to close it. People content with that? Dan, is your hand up from before?
No, it is up again, Chair, and it's just to recognise there's a number of linked actions that are proposed for closure on the basis that they should be rolled up into the first action from the June committee. And it was just a proposal that any updated action just reflects any specific asks that were made as part of those actions that are proposed for closure and roll in. And recognising that there's probably one other one within the report, which is in relation to targets and timescales, which is from its action 2 from the November meeting, targets and timescales. So I appreciate, obviously it's for members to determine, but from an official perspective, no issues with rolling together, but just recognising that some of the specifics as part of those earlier asks is not lost.
Okay, so we're suggesting people content, we close, but noting Dan's issues that was raised for us. Thank you very much. Again, proposing to close the performance report. We've had an update from that. People content to close. Moving on to the November options in terms of 001. looking at increased demand against statutory reduced workforce, meaning from a risk-based perspective in terms of achieving objectives. We've got an update there, and then from proposal that because it's presented under agenda item 11 for discussion that will inform future public reporting, that we keep this as ongoing. People content with that? 002.
Chair,
Yeah.
sorry, is it as ongoing? Oh, it is. I beg your pardon. I'm not scroll down far enough. I beg your
Yeah.
pardon.
No. Okay. Thanks.
Chair,
Paul.
ACC Stuart Houston would like to come in.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just really on that action 001 from November last year, that we do have an update. The fact is that the approval for us to get an uplift in investigators for the non-criminal complaints is obviously something that we're looking to progress just now and is out to interview. I just wonder if it would be possible just to sort of highlight that, and maybe I know it was proposed ongoing, but we'd probably like to come back once we help shape our operating model for non-criminal complaints in the future, that we maybe be able to bring back at the next meeting to see where we are with those uplifting non-police investigators.
Okay, so I think that would be helpful if we keep it ongoing, but with a target and an intention in mind to be able to bring this to a close by November, which would be really helpful. But thanks for that additional update. We'll note that in the meeting, in the minute.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
Are we on the 14th of November and it's 001?
Yeah.
Because I hadn't scrolled down far enough. That's down as proposed to close.
Yeah.
On the 26th of the 8th, 24.
Sorry, I must just be flicking through because it's down for me as proposed ongoing, but thank you very much for that, Paul. It's maybe just the way my screen is working or not working. So I've got the 14th of November, 001.
You go down to the 26th of the 8th.
14th of November 001, the first action is proposed ongoing.
Yeah, but then below that, it's got an update from the 26th of the 8th and it's proposed to close.
You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Yeah.
Absolutely right, Paul. Thank you.
I'll have,
right,
a look
okay.
I'll have a look at that and I'll engage with PSD on what the final update was on that.
Okay, thank you. But if so, we have, as ACC Houston has said, we have additional staff, service design team. So I'm just wondering if we have enough information there. I would probably like to see, and I'm sorry because I'm not Katerina, but I would probably like to see what ACC Houston is suggesting that comes to the November meeting before we close it. But I'm equally happy to, if my other colleagues would rather close it. Indifferent, so we'll.
I'm relaxed about that, Chair. So,
Okay, so thank you. We'll
Similarly.
right, thank you. We'll keep that as ongoing. 002. We're proposing to close. And that then is that, Colette, is that clear enough in terms of what we're doing with, okay, thank you very much. So we are moving on now to the Q1 report, and we are with ACC Houston.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll probably into the more detailed part of it. I'll let Helen cover some of that, going into sort of particularly some of the service delivery dashboard aspect of it. What I would probably point out first of all that the top level numbers there at the start of this report would tend to suggest that there is a decrease in the number of complaints over Q1. That probably isn't really the case, and the fact that some of this data was has been updated since this was probably supplied for the committee, and we are seeing it as at the same level or even about a 1% decrease from Q1 of the previous year. So I would just highlight that is slightly, and again, that's due to the fact is that complaints are coming in now that are from Q1 are now catching up. So there is a slight lag in that number. There is obviously quite a lot of detail in the report this time about some of the prevention work that we've got ongoing, which continues and is gathering quite a bit of both internal and external media interest, and we see that reported quite well now and is quite effective, particularly in the outcomes of misconduct. In relation to policy, there's a part in there about the PECS bill, again following on from your attendance at the Criminal Justice Committee. We've now all responded into the next part of the report that was published just prior to the summer recess. And again, we're working very hard with a small team, trying to prepare ourselves for what may come from that legislation and how we can embed that into going forward, particularly changes in regulations which are going to be or may be quite significant for us. I really think there's not a great deal of change from the last report. As I say, those numbers are slightly wrong and we've seen them catch up quite a bit, and it would be, I would say, it's a similar position to Q1 from the previous year and not that 9% decrease that's in the initial papers. So that's one that we can make sure that we hopefully for the next quarter, I think we will see the same again. I would say from anecdotally from the teams and from the daily contact we have with them, we are seeing probably still a huge demand for complaints being made in Q2. So I would like to think for the next meeting, we'll give a real comparison between the both quarters of this year. And if it's okay, I'll hand over to Helen maybe to cover some of the further detail.
Of course, thank you. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you very much, ACC Chair. Hopefully you can hear me all right in terms of volume. So I think the ACC has kind of covered off a number of the sort of opening comments in relation to the first few pages provided within the report. We clearly continue to develop the material and the information presented to yourselves, and very keen to welcome any questions or points of discussion after I've given you a quick overview of some of the key parts within the paper. So as the ACC has mentioned, the continued focus around our prevention activity through both the standard and our gross misconduct outcomes and the publication of these, and they continue to be well received within the organisation in terms of the discussions generated and the ability and that sort of raised awareness in the organisation. The next few dashboards really are there to provide you a holistic overview of the extent of the overall demand and the nature of inquiries across the whole of the PSC business area. I don't intend to go into any of the dashboards in too much detail, other than just to call out on page 3 in the service delivery dashboard, the sort of increase in the excessive force allegations year to date, which is noted on there. And we continue to work with divisions to communicate this to divisions and encourage and ensure the recording in terms of use of force forms within divisions. And I will touch a little bit more on that later within the main part of the report. So going on to page 5 in the report, in terms of the overall level of complaints received, as the ACC has commented, we have rerun the data that's presented, because certainly where that was initially showing a small reduction in terms of the previous year to date, and we do recognise that Q1 last year was of an exceptionally high level in terms of our sort of 5-year average in relation to complaints. We are now showing 1,875 in terms of complaints received within Q1, which is just 1.9% under the previous year to date, and 7.5% in terms of the 5-year average in terms of an increase. So we are showing that pattern as we saw last year in terms of an elevated level that takes us above the confidence level in terms of the volume of that. Now, part of that is just as we were still working through some of those complaints received in terms of engaging with complainants, understanding the complaint, and then recording the complaint. That's that reasoning for that slight increase in terms of actually the reporting number. So in terms of that overall volume, I just kind of give the committee the reassurance in terms of the regular tracking, monitoring and the engagement that we're having within divisions. We're working hard to increase the visibility and the awareness of these matters across the divisions, linking in with dashboards within the organisation so that we can make sure that the divisional commanders, divisions can take ownership and drive forward some of the changes and some of the kind of trends and patterns that we see within the complaints. Just going back in terms of the figures as presented within the report, 801 complaints FLR'd during the year to date, which is a small decrease in relation to previous year to date, but we do still have opportunity in terms of trying to FLR those through second conversations with complainers, and we are anticipating that that rate will rise as we progress through this year. FLR is sitting at a higher rate within the NHARU, which is obviously that initial assessment point, where that's sitting at 44.6 year to date, which is elevated, which is raised or increased from previous year to date. We have over the last little while really made sure that we've aligned our resource into that initial assessment point, that early engagement with complainers and trying to early resolve these matters, which we are mainly seeing within that area as sort of non-serious, non-complex and non-criminal in nature, but clearly driving forward that FLR at an early and an initial stage within that. The report then goes on to outline where we are seeing some of the sort of increases in particular areas, and I don't intend to go into too much detail in relation to those that are outlined within the report, seeing a year-to-date increase in the North East in Edinburgh compared to the 5-year average, with mainly those being increases within the policy procedure allegations and also service outcome within the North East. Within the East, it is noted in terms of the corporate services increase, which is mainly linked to irregularity in procedures. And then within the West on page 6, it's 5-year average increases in Greater Glasgow and also Dumfries and Galloway, and mostly linked to irregularity in procedure, assault and excessive force, in particular those within the Greater Glasgow area. I just pause in terms of chart 3, which does show the complaints against each of the last quarters, just touching clearly on Q1 being at that raised level, as we've spoken about, bringing it back up to Q1 of last year. Moving on to page 7 within the report, where we pull out some of the emerging trends. So previously we spoke about increase in discriminatory behaviour. They are now assessed to have levelled off within Q1 of this year to date, but clearly we maintain an overview and monitoring in terms of those, and the overall level remains at a low level in terms of the overall context of our interactions with members of the public. Quality of service allegations also noticed to be at an elevated level last year, but we are seeing a decrease in terms of the quality of service allegations in terms of service delivery and service outcomes, where we have seen some decreases. Moving on in terms of emerging trends, just looking at the excessive force. So we are seeing an increase on the previous year to date, sitting at 167 in terms of excessive force, which is a 20 increase in terms of the 5-year average. And that's mostly influenced by increases in Greater Glasgow, but we also note lower volumes in some other areas within that. Just due to that, in terms of the Greater Glasgow, we did do a deeper dive looking at excessive force within the Greater Glasgow division, looking at the 39 there, just to see if there's any sort of patterns and trends that we'd be looking at. So we looked at in terms of the most frequent sort of body areas impacted, and mainly it relates to sort of the body in general, and that's kind of action taken by officers in either kind of facing or kind of in terms of the wording within the complaint, sort of the most frequent theme being thrown into or thrown onto the ground or thrown into a police vehicle, being taken to the ground or being pushed and dragged as well. What we also see within this is kind of use of handcuffs in terms of the arms, where that kind of excessive force is being alleged to have been applied. So use of handcuffs, but also use of other officer safety measures such as use of the application of spit hood, but also the application of fast straps within the legs. So that's just a little bit of an overview to give the committee reassurance in terms of looking at the deeper dive within the excessive force within Greater Glasgow. Moving on to assault allegations, assault remained above the 5-year average with 131 allegations received year to date. And we do recognise that previous year to date we saw high volume within this area as well. So again, Greater Glasgow is being noted as being one of the sort of greater influences in terms of the national increase in terms of that from the Glasgow division. We do obviously highlight that all on-duty assaults are submitted to PERT under our Article 3 arrangements for assessment, scrutiny and potential investigation, ensuring that enhanced transparency and independence in relation to assault matters. Similar to excessive force, a deeper dive in relation to year-to-date allegations in relation to assault, identified the most frequent sort of use in terms of that, the body in general, kind of use of hands by officers, most frequently cited, elbow strikes, throwing, pushing, and also use of sort of batons in terms of some of the detail that's provided within the kind of assault allegations linked to Greater Glasgow. So again, we continue to sort of review that. We did do a deeper dive at the end of last year just around the assault allegations linked to Greater Glasgow in terms of most of them being linked to the arrest of an individual and kind of subsequent resistance within that. And there were no specific impacts to factors identified in terms of contributing to the increase. We recognise that public space and dwelling were more the sort of locus areas in terms of that. And most of it being looked at in terms of arm grabs, sort of individuals being taken to the ground and the application of handcuffs within it as well. Moving on then in terms of just also within the emerging trends, we do recognise in terms of the sort of unlawful and unnecessary arrests, the detention and an increase in those. It is mainly low in volume in terms of the increase. But clearly it's a category that again we continue to monitor, and most of that is linked to complainants expressing dissatisfaction over an arrest or in terms of police action. Moving on to page 8 within the report, 2 increases within the subtype in regularity and procedure noted within the custody procedures and care of prisoners, and also stop search in terms of increase within that. As requested at the bottom of that page by yourselves, we did have a look in terms of the stop search data. The number of allegations involving a stop search circumstances are presented. There were 34 allegations attached to 21 separate complaints, which is a particular low volume in relation to the wider context of our volume of complaints received. And also when we compare that to the average 8,255 stop and search incidents recorded each quarter by Police Scotland. So those data, those figures presented there to the committee for your awareness. Moving on to page 9 in terms of chart 8 and the allegations received, again, just provided there for the committee's awareness. And at this point, I don't intend to go into any other detail in relation to that, but very happy to take any questions with regards to that. Moving on to page 10 and service delivery, allegations are upheld in Q1 are at a reduced rate, sitting at 11.6 compared to the previous year to date in respect of that. We do continue to look at allegations, to look at analyse themes and trends in terms of upheld complaints, discussing them through our preventions and professionalism ops group in relation to that, and then putting out preventions messages or whether there's any training on action. And while that work continues to develop, and I give that committee with assurance in respect of that. The paper also outlines in terms of the time scale, which I know has previously been spoken about in terms of the committee, and to give the reassurance we continue to work to try and reduce in terms of our time scales for completion in relation to caps. And some of the high level rationale in terms of, as listed within the report, in terms of the kind of extended periods and some of the delays in the closure of complaints linked to the number of allegations involved, the complexity of the complaint, the number and availability of sort of subject and witness officers involved, the kind of engagement with the complainer, the volume of correspondence submitted by complainers, the kind of some of the challenges in terms of the sort of expectations as we work through the complaint matters, where sometimes we see sort of, you know, further points being raised as we're working through, and just really the sort of the high number that in terms of quite specialist in nature. So those are some of the high level reasons in terms of some of the kind of extension in terms of the time frame in terms of progressing with the complaints. We have those previously spoken in the action log. We are looking at the sort of increase in terms of the bringing in of staff to help to support the investigation of non-criminal complaints. And we hope the next committee to be able to provide an update in terms of that uplift to our team, and then looking at actually our current operating model and moving that forward in terms of making sure that we've got that capacity to deal with the increasing volumes that we're seeing within complaints. Moving on then, in terms of, they've also mentioned on that page in terms of CHR matters, in terms of an increase in terms of those being found to have been handled to a reasonable standard, but we also do recognise that the volume of CHRs within Quarter 1 is at a particularly sort of low rate in terms of that, but also highlight that it is 1.6% of complaints reported to be subject to a CHR, so very low in terms of the volume side. Moving on in terms of the service delivery, on page 11, it's newly included data in relation to our complaint user satisfaction survey is being provided to the committee in relation to that. 28.1% responded that they were satisfied or very satisfied with the response, which is a continued increase that we do see from the previous year to date in respect of that. And in terms of the engagement rates, that does remain pretty level in terms, pretty constant in terms of those that are engaging. In terms of the referrals, it's just noted there within page 12. I don't intend to put out any sort of detail, but clearly the increase in the volume 5 after 3 referrals linked to what we're seeing in terms of the increase in assault allegations as they are coming through within Quarter 1. Moving into page 13 and 14 in terms of the conduct element of this report. Obviously, we've got the sort of 78 police officers that were suspended, are suspended during Quarter 1, and 104 subject to duty restrictions during that time. That a number of them are linked to some of our sort of significant operations investigations that we've got ongoing. Preliminary investigations remain at a fairly constant rate to last year, with 124 matters being reviewed. We'll pull out in terms of the 11 hearings that were scheduled within Quarter 1 that has resulted in 5 officers being dismissed and a further 4 officers resigning or retiring prior to the hearing date, which is a large volume in terms of those numbers, in terms of officers. There's a percentage of officers that are no longer serving with us, with those matters being taken to hearings. I'm probably going to conclude on that, other than clearly organisational learning referenced on page 15, and then also just the inclusion of definitions of the categories of complaint within Appendix D, just for the committee's awareness. But I think that is all of the points that I was keen to pull out, and then I'll have any questions. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for that thorough going over in terms of just highlighting what the key issues are and making some comparisons. Members, any comments or questions? Paul?
Yeah. Firstly, regarding the backlog, I understand that it's a down by about 9 or 10% the number of complaints received, but I understand there is a summon process. Is it approximately the same, or are we going to get a bigger surge?
Sorry, I can't quite. Sorry, can you repeat that in terms of the backlog, in terms of the volume? Are you saying
volume of complaints is down, and part of the reason for that is it's backed up. That was what I've read. I can't find it in the papers just now, but that's what I read earlier. So can we expect quite a large substantial increase in next quarter?
So I guess to give you the reassurance, when we're talking about the backlog, these are matters that have been through the NCARU process already, so that they have already had an opportunity at FLR. They have been recorded. So when I spoke about slightly the increase in Q1 up to 1,875, which was an increase of 139, those were some of the elements that were still sitting in NCARU from June, having gone through that assessment. So we're now confident that this Q1 figure being presented is where we are sitting at the moment in terms of the volume in Q1, but obviously some of those are large, and we'll take that opportunity. The other matters then categorised, and where it is appropriate, where it is some of the kind of lower level matters that require that investigation, they will then go into that backlog that we're obviously working through at this point.
That's great. That's really assuring. The second question I've got is on Appendix C, the misconduct outcomes for July. And I'm looking at number 6, and of course we've seen that receive a fair amount of media attention. I wonder if you can give us a little bit more, if possible, on this, particularly about the clear responsibles for safeguarding children and young people.
Yeah, I could maybe cover that if that's okay. Again, looking at that in particular, the outcomes here, I think it probably needs to be stressed, and I know there was some media coverage on this, is that the person was dismissed for failing to meet the standards of professional behaviour within the organisation. And although there's that part about outcomes that could be for court, which in this case, the number 6 you've mentioned, was not proven, it's for us then to look at that as part of that misconduct investigation, which parts it could be involving children or other vulnerable people as well, and making sure how are we going to capture that within the evidence for a misconduct hearing. And I would say that sometimes that's you know, a vulnerable witness who's already been through a court process. For us to try and repeat that in the misconduct wouldn't be, I don't think, really advisable at times. So it's making sure that how we gather that evidence to ensure the person's breached the standards of professional behaviour, and we're able to put that towards a hearing. So there is that sort of real consideration about the protection of not just children, as it was in this case, but vulnerable people who may be required to give evidence twice if there was a part for a misconduct hearing.
And generally, the standard of professional behaviour is higher than the standard for criminal behaviour. I'm not articulating that well, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably that, you know, we're obviously proving the standards of professional behaviour is that the fact is they've breached that, and it is, you know, quite clear and about, for example, discreditable conduct, that an action that undermines public confidence in policing. That's quite a broad aspect of a standard. But again, it's that point about proving the person's actions, although may not end up in a criminal conviction, they've breached our standards of professional behaviour, and we need to deal with that whether on or off duty.
Great. Well, thanks for that.
Sorry, Katrina?
Yes, thanks. I mean, pursuing the misconduct topic, I'm just looking for some clarity really around where we're at in terms of the time frame for dealing with these. You know, when you've got average time under investigation and investigation and proceedings. I mean, we've had the conversation before, haven't we, about the length of time it could take. I just wondered where we were in terms of addressing that. And the other question I had was, again, it's really a clarification around the organisational learning. Can you expand a wee bit on that last item? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think Helen's going to answer the organisational learning one first, and when we come back to the misconduct one, if that's okay.
So I guess we are kind of making sure that, you know, organisational learning within PSD comes from so many different elements and kind of factors in terms of us bringing that in, making sure that's collated and making sure that's reviewed, and then kind of, you know, communicating that out to the appropriate areas at the division. So what I would really like to do is actually kind of bring something more sort of substantive around our organisational learning, because it is something that we continually reflect on now, you know, because they come in through, whether that's kind of, obviously we have prepared recommendations that come in, but even just in our own review of incidents and matters and collating all of that, we have learning that comes out of our misconduct. So we are doing that work at the moment just to kind of formalise that structure around that. To give you the reassurance, we continually feed this out in terms of the divisions to capture that, to make sure in particular if there's any sort of threat or risk identified through that we communicate that learning so that there isn't a repeat. Again, we're trying to work now to make sure that that more formal structure around it exists to feed into the wider organisational learning as well. So I would be really keen at an appropriate point to bring that back to the committee and talk through kind of what that looks like, but also the impact of that I think is really important. So what we're trying to do is to give you a flavour within this of some of the organisational learning that has been communicated out, reviews of the sorts of the work that's happened within that. But again, maybe come back into a future committee with that wider overview if that was all right.
That's great, thank you.
If it's okay, Chair, maybe just touch on the misconduct, the timescales that are mentioned. Obviously, it's detailed on the report there, and I think the part about average time under investigation is 63 days, but for investigation and proceedings to give that to conclusion is 217. I appreciate that does seem a lengthy period of time. I think probably just to one of the aspects of this is that some areas of misconduct, particularly gross misconduct hearings, are quite complex and involve quite often significant legal scrutiny and challenge from the representatives, from those that are representing subject officers, and that does take time. We did see probably quite an increase in the number of hearings that we had in Q1. I can say already that in Q2 that's going to be slowed down slightly, but because we have seen some difficulties in getting hearings to in front of a chair quite quickly. And again, as I say, that is probably due to some challenges, work that's ongoing, but again, the volume is quite large there, and the fact is you saw from that the number of officers that were subject of suspension, which again would either be criminal or could end up in the gross misconduct space, so there is quite a large demand in that area as well.
Thanks for that. Katrina, are you content with that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. I have 2 or 3 questions. I'll maybe give you them all and then let you divide them up. So the allegations that are upheld, I think, looks quite low. So about 11%, you're essentially agreeing with the complainant, but yet if I'm going to say that your user satisfaction seems quite high in terms of that. So the question that I have in my mind is that accurate? Which I'm sure it's accurate, but how much in terms of really understanding the complainant's perspective what action are you taking to really understand what the complainant's perspective is and why they would complain and why you wouldn't uphold it? The next one is, I see there's an increase in the number of suspended officers. Is that natural variation in terms of things are not going to be linear? Or is that because people have more confidence to come forwards and raise concerns? And then my third and final question, it probably links to a bit to what Katrina was asking about learning in terms of that whole culture shift. In fact, it probably goes through all of my questions. As we shift the culture, do you think we're going to have more people speaking out and therefore an increase in complaints, an increase in matters of conduct until it settles back down again? Once people have confidence that you're speaking out, it's, I think, across all organisations, not just Police Scotland, people who speak out are often afraid, but once there's a confidence in the system that they will actually look at their complaint and take action and be supportive of the person who's raised concerns, then more people are prepared to speak out. So that whole thing about to me, it seems counterintuitive. Low number upheld, but high user satisfaction, increased number of suspension. Is it natural deviation, or is it people are more confident are coming forward? And then if you could say a bit more about where you think that paradigm shift of the culture is going to take you in terms of finding, getting to the sweet spot of we're not going to be expecting an increase in allegations against officers.
Chair, if it's okay, I'll ask Helen to answer the first bit about the complaints and the user satisfaction, and I'll answer the last 2 points after that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also I do have one of my team, Superintendent Peter Stevens, who's on the call with us, who kind of has that oversight and responsibility in terms of the non-criminal gap. So again, if I go with yourself, Joe, I will just welcome her after I made a few comments of whether she would like to make any other comments. You know, I do think you're obviously clearly right in terms of that comment, in terms of it being a very small proportion that are upheld in terms of the overall volume of complaints. What I would say, and to give the reassurance, is the level of engagement and detail that the investigations team go into with our complainants in terms of working through, really discussing with them to identify actually what is their element of complaint, and then working that through in terms of the level of investigation that goes into these matters to make sure that we are answering off all of their points in relation to that. So actually what I believe what you do find is that we have this kind of very detailed and thorough response that's provided to them in relation to their final letter that then comes out, and then that is reflected that actually that explanation is there even when it is not upheld, in terms of actually what we've looked at and the level of detail that has gone into that investigation when it needs to in terms of the matter. So I would say it's partly that engagement level through the PSD, and that's where, you know, complaints sitting within a PSD, within a team that's building up skills, building up experience of dealing with complainants. That's where we can see some of the benefits. Hey, I don't know if you would have any other points that you would wish to draw out in terms of just that sort of the volume, the low level of upheld within that whole area of complaints.
Yeah, so I guess just from looking at the work that the team do, there's obviously they go through the 6-stage process in terms of handling the complaint, and stage 4 of that is the determination. So when the officers are undertaking their investigation, they have to kind of undertake an objective analysis, and this is, you know, this is aligned to the PERC statutory guidance and aligned to the CAPSOP in terms of the evidence that they've got. So they need to consider the act or the omission that's prompted the complaint, whether or not the facts establish, support or contradict the complaint, and work through that as part of the kind of the investigation process. So obviously the conclusion of that is a determination around about whether the allegation is upheld or not. And I think non-criminal complaints are determined using the civil, if I get this right, civil standard of proof. So it's the balance of probabilities, and the decision whether to uphold the complaint must be taken in that balance. So it should obviously be upheld where the findings establish that the service provided or the conduct of the person subject to the complaint is fallen below the standard that we would reasonably expect, but conversely they would not uphold it where that's not found to be the case. So I guess just to provide you that reassurance that you know, when deciding on you know, that determination, that the officers within PSD are clearly independent to those circumstances. They collate all of the information and you know, come to that conclusion. Where there are conflicting accounts or events, you know, generally based on all the available evidence, whether the complaint is more, where it's more probable that the, you know, there's a competing, you know, sorry, I'm not covering this particularly well, but where there are conflicting accounts of events, those determining the complaint based on all the available evidence, it's not upheld. So in terms of answering, you know, the reason for the drop, I don't have a specific reason for that, I guess. You know, we've seen obviously a reduction in the CHR applications that have gone into PERC in this quarter. The output from that is obviously those reasonably handled. We've seen an increase on that. So I guess from that perspective, the reduction in the number upheld may, you know, align to the small number or the small decrease or the decrease in CHRs that have been applied for as well. So I guess just to give you the assurance around about the independence and the thorough investigations that are undertaken by the team throughout the non-criminal process, and hopefully that provides a little bit of reassurance around about that.
And just to check, when you write your final letter out to the complainant, they are advised of the right to go to PERC.
But on every occasion, yes. There's a standard paragraph that's included in all final letters, which invite the complainant, if they're dissatisfied with the outcome of the complaint, to then that's their recourse. And I know PERC colleagues are obviously on the call, so they can provide a bit more detail around about that.
That's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Probably, I'm going to start with the increased numbers of suspensions that you mentioned there during your question. I think we have seen that fluctuate over the last 6 months. We were over 80 at one point during the early part of the year, and as we came to producing papers for this meeting, it was sitting at 78. That does vary, I must say, on sometimes a weekly basis, and the fact is that officers that may be subject to that may resign, retire, or majority, or are at a hearing. What I would say is that is affected by the fact is that we see that demand of what we need to do to move to hearings. And I know it was mentioned in Helen's earlier input was that there was 11 hearings and 2 misconduct meetings in the scheduled in the year to date, which is quite significant. Well, the 5 hearings have led to an officer dismissal in the first quarter. When you can compare that to the whole of last year, there was only 6 dismissals. So we are sort of increasing that, and that does have an impact on what we are trying to ensure that we put that out there. I think as well, I do think your questions are linked, and the fact is that since we've obviously started to publish the outcomes internally within the organisation using the standard, I think it'd be really useful for us to go away and review what impact that has had on officers' understanding of what could happen for breaching the standards of professional behaviour. That's not something we've looked at. We've obviously just concluded wider within the organisation the staff survey, which concluded at the end of August, and it may be useful for us to get some feed out from that to see is there anything in there that we need to be aware of. When you ask the question about is encouraging people to report, so we maybe deal internally, I think that's something that we need to try and measure was, are people more likely to raise something internally when they see an outcome? And that obviously piece of, I suppose, psychological safety within the organisation that are going to be supported in something that they raise. I think that's something we're really keen to try and establish. The other part is the external part, is the fact is your police misconduct is probably more in the media now than ever it has been probably for a number of years for the wrong reasons as well, and that's something that we maybe need to be alive to, that we do see an increase in. We've already said we see an increase in complaints, so the likelihood is you may likely see the increase of us proving misconduct on some occasions. I do think the volume that we're dealing with in relation to looking at misconduct is quite large, but the fact is it's important that, one, we were able to give trust and confidence to the person that's making the complaint that we've assessed that for misconduct, but also trust and confidence to our colleagues that we're protecting those that are doing their job correctly, and those that are not, we're able to take action upon them as soon as possible. So when we get to, you mentioned about getting to a sweet spot, I think we need to be confident that people are willing to come forward and report things to us, particularly internally, and I think that's a positive change. We offer a lot of different avenues for people to report, whether that be through the Integrity Matter system. We also saw the launch of the National Anti-Corruption and Abuse Line this year, in line with Crime Stoppers, which is a UK-wide approach to reporting police matters that maybe are misconduct or criminal. We are waiting, that's obviously been around for I think 6 months now. We are waiting on a national report on that to see what levels that's occurred across the country. So I think there's a lot of things that we probably need to go away and say, did we have an impact by stuff that we published? Did we have an impact by opening up the avenues of reporting to allow us to shape how does our prevention programme going forward into next year look? Where do we need to target and where are we missing?
That's really helpful. Thanks very much, ACC Houston. And then one very last thing from me is the whole piece on learning and improvement versus judgment. And again, that balance between supporting people and rather taking punitive action and having learning and improvement. And I wondered if you could say a bit about how you balance that, please.
So I think there's a bit here about balancing what could be a performance matter and what could be a conduct matter, and I think that's something that we as an organisation are really keen to explore. I think we have an opportunity here with the change in the PECS bill, and the fact is that misconduct and the conduct process is quite prescriptive and the number of stages that we currently in our Scottish regulations are quite different from colleagues south of the border who have, I think, a more concise process. I think there's an opportunity for us to say, if you were to raise the level of what is conduct or misconduct slightly to a higher level and deal with matters on a performance basis for those that could be dealt with by first and second line managers, I think that's something we need to explore, because you're absolutely right, it could be a misunderstanding or someone's awareness of something that we could deal with them in a performance instead of ultimately going to conduct. But I do think the stages that we have just now are a bit too prescriptive for how we would like to move into that more of a performance, please. Okay. I think Helen may like to add to that as well, because it's something we've discussed.
Yeah.
It's an area that I feel very, very passionately about, and I do. I would endorse everything that the ACC has just said. We are already starting to try and support divisions where there might be an opportunity for sort of looking at the performance in terms of an improvement plan and actually try and formalising that. But this is about supporting officers to develop and learn from experiences or from whatever has happened, and we need to give that word support. So we are already trying to do it where we are assessing things that can be dealt with through improvement action, and actually just seeing how we can support that and try and change that sort of dialogue that this is actually about sort of improving your performance and supporting you so that it doesn't become more serious in the future. So we are trying to do that whilst, as the ACC says, the work in terms of the PETs and the PETs developments through in terms of the regulations, and just trying to see what opportunities there are.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you very much indeed. I'm still over that. I'm going to move us on now to Darren. If you've got the SPA annual and quarterly report, please.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, it's just SPA quarterly report. Apologies if there's an issue with the agenda. Thanks, colleagues. I'll take the paper as read, but provide a high-level summary. So this quarterly report includes key statistics reflecting the position at the end of Q1 of this year with a comparison to the previous 7 quarters, and additionally provides an update on findings from the DIP sample of closed police complaints, Police Scotland complaints during Q3 of last year. In terms of the quarterly update, looking across the 8-quarter view, no significant changes from what I've typically reported in the past. So, as you know, we generally receive a low volume of complaints and corresponding allegations, and within that context, numbers have remained largely consistent over the period. Again, noting volumes remain low, and the authority's responsibility to deal with relevant complaints cover senior officers, SP corporate forensic staff, and indeed complaints about the authority itself. The majority of complaints received over the period relate to senior officers. The balance of complaints, the majority, 57%, relate to on-duty complaints, with the remaining 43% relating to dissatisfaction with the quality of service received. As previously, early stage resolution, which is the equivalent term for frontline resolution that you've heard earlier on this morning, that continues to be an effective means of addressing complaints of a less serious nature, and indeed was the approach to addressing all allegations received during the 8-quarter period. Of those 5 cases closed during the reporting period, 1 was completed out with the 40 working day target, and the explanation is provided in the report around about that. And there were 2 relevant complaints ongoing at the end of Q1. I'll carry on unless there are any questions specifically in terms of that aspect, if that's okay. In terms of DIP sampling, the more detailed report is attached to Appendix C. This is our 4th sample following the reintroduction of the DIP sampling process. And as I say, it covers closed complaints during Q3, noting that we omitted to look at Q2 because that was the period specifically looked at by PERC in its recent audit. There are a number of findings identified, a number of high-level recommendations, which are broadly similar to those identified over the previous DIP samples, and again align with some of the commentary provided in earlier PERC complaint handling review reports, and also the earlier joint SP PERC and more recent PERC audit findings. I would just note specifically the SP complaints team, which is very small. We have some specific capacity challenges just now, particularly due to a number of pending retirals, which we are recruiting into the team, but it will mean that temporarily we'll need to pause the DIP sampling process albeit with the intention to resume in the future where that capacity challenge has been addressed. Some other matters to note, and I appreciate there was an action from a previous meeting around about updates in terms of the National Complaint Handling Development Group. This was a group that had been paused some time back to allow us to kind of reflect. It's a multi-agency group involving those partners on the call, and its intention is primarily to use it as a vehicle for shared learning, and particularly to pick up any kind of key matters arising from the committee as well. So an update is consistently provided following the resumption of the group. Updates consistently provided in this report, recognising it provides a public vehicle to provide update on the discussions. It met last in June and is next scheduled to meet on the 26th of September. Interestingly, the last meeting was really useful in having an opportunity to engage with the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman. It linked into an earlier recommendation from the Angelini review and proved to be quite helpful, and given us some food for thought in terms of kind of future areas of consideration. The report does provide an update on one complaint handling review, which was undertaken, an SPA complaint that was closed, which was undertaken during the period by the PIRC. Whilst the complaint handling review did not require reconsideration of the original decision made, it did identify one recommendation and a number of learning points, and there'll be an opportunity for members to discuss that later in the meeting. The last point I would make before I stop for questions is just to note that the team recently undertook a benchmarking exercise to look at public reporting of complaint and conduct matters by other in relation to policing elsewhere within the UK. That report has now been shared with Police Scotland, and intention is to engage in discussion with Police Scotland around about some of the potential opportunities for improvement identified. These are not formal recommendations, and it is recognised that, you know, as the committee have heard in the past, some of this will be dependent on system improvements, which obviously are in train within Police Scotland just now. So that's probably everything I would say, and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Paul.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. This is the one I was going to ask about the significant backlog on, hence my confusion previously and the incoherence of it. It's page six, and apologies to Police Scotland officers for having to pitch that, but it's page 6, Darren. It makes reference to 47 applications for complaint handling reviews, decrease of 23, so it's minus 33%, but it does reference a significant backlog of unallocated relevant complaints within PST affecting these. So can I ask how big that backlog is, and you know, how will this compare subsequently to previous years?
Apologies, Paul. This isn't the SPA complaints report. Yeah, no, we have we had 2 complaints ongoing at the end of the quarter. So
I'm sorry, I'm on a roll today. It's insomnia.
No, that's quite all right. Don't worry. Do you have any other questions, Paul?
No, that's it.
No. Okay. The one question I have, Darren, is about the withdrawals. And do you have a view on whether or not, so why do people withdraw? Is it because they don't have a confidence in the system? Is it because they've had interaction and they're then content?
I think that's a question to be fair to ask of Police Scotland. We've not gone in specifically into the details of the. I mean, the distinction, I suppose, is a withdrawal where someone's essentially said they no longer wish to pursue the complaint, as opposed to abandoned complaints. This was from the DIP sample. I think that the key observation we've made, and I think that, sorry, one other thing I should say before I move forward, our DIP sampling has been more limited than it might historically have been in the past before it was resumed, recognising the work of the kind of wider 6-stage full audit that we're undertaking. So we haven't deep dived necessarily into some of those things that we may potentially do when we resume DIP sampling post audit, post addressing the capacity challenges. But I think that the main thing that we've focused in on, having looked at timescales at the various aspects of the process, is where there's an alignment between delays in contact with complainers throughout the process and complaints that are ultimately abandoned by complainants. And I know that that's something we've picked up through our small dip samples. And I think certainly the contact with complainers is a particular matter that PERC identifies within its most recent audit report. As I say, I think we can certainly engage with Police Scotland in more detail around it, but with withdrawn complaints, if that would be more helpful. But I think probably that there's a question there for Police Scotland in the immediate sense. So, sorry, Chair, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I was curious in terms of it's underpinning some of my thoughts around the questions I had asked for Police Scotland in terms of really understanding the issues that support people to come forwards and through that process. So no, that's grand. Right, we'll move on to our PERC quarterly report with Ilya or Phil, and obviously we can recognise that the members have read the report.
Good morning, committee. Good morning, Chair. I'll perhaps start, if that's okay, in terms of the report layout and provide a brief summary of our quarter one report in relation to complaint handling reviews. The committee will note 47 CHR applications received in quarter one. I think Paul correctly identified that there is a drop in terms of the number of the applications from quarter four or quarter one of the previous financial year. The report does attribute some of this drop potentially to a decrease in the number of cases being concluded by the Police Scotland. Generally, you'll see that we've requested 46 sets of papers from Police Scotland. Notable improvement in terms of the overall timescales for provision of the paperwork, for 4.8 working days on average. All cases papers were provided within the 15 working days. You'll note that Police Scotland and PERC have now started to use egress as a system for secure transfer of the information, and that seems to have had a positive effect as well. Generally speaking, you'll see that in terms of the cases that we've taken on for a review, we've had to make 40 additional information requests. Those on average took 9.4 working days. Again, it appears that the vast majority of the complaint cases that we receive contain missing information. So we're undertaking analysis just now just to identify what type of information is routinely being missed, and thereafter we will liaise with our colleagues within the professional standards to try to address that. In terms of the outcomes, you'll see 27 CHRs were issued to Police Scotland in quarter one, with 21 additional CHR cases being concluded by the discretionary decision. Overall, there is some positive findings there. You'll see that the number of the complaints we deemed reasonably handled has increased to 67% in quarter one. So that's a 10% improvement on the last year's average and 11% on quarter four. So that's undoubtedly a positive finding, albeit I recognise that perhaps the number of complaints reviewed in quarter one was slightly lower than usual. 27 recommendations were made within those CHRs. You'll see that one category is dominating those stats, and that's 11 recommendations related to conducting further inquiry. So that's effectively where during the review we deemed that the complaint inquiry was not sufficient. 20 learning points were identified. Majority were individual learning points for PSD complaint handlers. We've provided a summary of the main themes arising out of there. Communication with complainer being one, adherence to the statutory guidance, and also acknowledgement of the delays in responding to the complaints. Thereafter, the committee will note a summary of our engagement with the stakeholders. I think couple of things to highlight. Simply, a further liaison event between PERC and PSD is being planned towards the end of this financial year. And also the committee will note that we've now held two rounds of the practitioners' forums with individual areas within professional standards department, and those sessions are really designed to improve the complaint handling by providing a very specific feedback directly to the practitioners and assisting them with some practical advice and guidance. And that's probably concludes my section of the report.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hill. And again, we don't need, we have read the report, so just the top level highlights would be helpful. Are you looking for Phil to give us the highlights for his, or are you ready for questions, Elia?
I can go through my report, Chair, and just take them jointly, if that's okay. Yep. So again, going on the premise that the paper's been read, I won't go through it in detail. The general overview in terms of the trends experienced in Q1, the referrals are relatively stable. We've experienced a slight uptick in the number of PAVA cases that are referred to us, nothing particularly significant, but one that we'll keep an eye on as an increase of 11 in the quarter, which is page 18 on your graphics. There's a reduction of 5 cases in relation to serious injuries, which are referred to us. In relation to the death that was referred by the police, it was initially referred. However, the Crown have superseded that with a Crown-directed death investigation. So that's currently undergoing. In relation to our KPIs, you'll see that the figures are all very positive, with the exception of the Category A and Category B and C cases, which are the less serious, more voluminous cases that we deal with, where we're at 77%, the KPI being at 80. Just to put that in context, that relates to 3 cases that were late in dealing with them, so nothing of any great significance. Moving to recommendations on page 21, there's 2 recommendations. Darren spoke about them earlier on, just about us keeping the committee updated in relation to the recommendations. 2 recommendations were made. They're there for noting, and they're still within timescales for Police Scotland to come back to us. And if the committee are in agreement, we'll provide an update once we receive that in the next quarterly paper. Other than that, nothing significant to report to the committee, and happy to take questions.
That's really helpful. Thanks very much indeed. Members, any comments or questions? Paul?
Yes, third time lucky. The backlog. Can we get some assurance about the backlog, or some understanding of how big it is? Well, I'm assuming that will impact on next cycles or next quarters figures.
Well, I don't know if it's a question for me or Police Scotland.
Just anyone that can answer.
Maybe both of you, yes. Maybe a perspective from you, Eliat, and then we'll maybe go to ACC Houston.
I think it probably would be better if I would follow up from ACC Houston's answer, because I think, in fairness, ACC Houston will probably be more aware of the level of the backlog.
Yeah. Okay, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Really, in relation to the backlog of non-criminal complaints, is something that we've obviously been working on for a period of time now, and trying to bring that down. We have had that options to reduce it by categorising the non-criminal complaints in a very, very similar way to how the PUC do the categorisation as well. I think that's been helpful for us to see where we need to go. I think there is that other aspect of us, the recruitment of the non-police investigators is something that is going to assist with that as well. As I sort of said in response to the action, that's something we're trying to do. We are sitting at over 1,000 in that backlog just now, which is unallocated, which again, that is ones that actually have been, when we say unallocated, they have been subject of assessment. And the fact is there's been that opportunity for frontline resolution and are categorised. And it's about making sure that we are in a place where we have been telling complainers where that sits and what we're hoping to do with that. But I am hoping that we can reduce that over the course of the next few months. There is some work that we're looking to do as well, that some of those complaints may have require the sort of that second conversation following the Encario assessment to see where we can go with that, and particularly when it comes to those that maybe quality of service or where we can take that learning really quickly and put that back in. So it's that assessment process that we're trying to get right to make sure that we are progressing those to full investigation of the ones that properly need to be answered there and then, but those that don't, we need to make sure that we're assessing them appropriately.
Thanks, ACC Houston. Paul, any follow-ups?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because the report does make reference to a significant backlog. Is it less significant than it was in the past? And why has it built up?
So I think I can answer. I think the build-up of it is over a period of time, and the fact is that it's probably not a recent thing, and the fact is this is probably built up over probably 18 months to 2 years and even beyond that. And the fact is that you've got, we've seen more complaints coming in that we're allocating to staff who can't take on others, if that makes sense. So you are going to end up the reduction that you're going to get of who you can allocate that to. What I would say is I think we need to look at the system of how we assess those complaints in the first instance, and I think that's where we have tried to say what can be subject of an FLR a bit quicker, and the fact is it's that instant opportunity to go back to a complainant and explain something quicker. I think it's where we need to get to, and making that appropriate assessment. There is ones in there that do require full investigation, but there are those that I think we could answer a bit more efficiently and a bit quicker, and make sure that we're getting the relevant complaints put forward in the right place. It is something that, as I say, we are working on. We have an improvement plan that myself and the PSD team are looking at on a regular basis about how we take that forward. And Kate, who's still on the call just now, her team are regularly doing that each and every day. We've also had an opportunity to use some support from other areas, from other divisions to come in and support us with that, and that's something that I'm continuing to ask for at the right time and make sure that we can at least eat into any demand.
Okay, and is there any further support you need from us or from Police Scotland in order to address this effectively?
Yeah, I think what I would really like to do over the next, and probably prior to the next meeting, is be able to give you an update of where we're going with that. I think we need to be have that ability to carry out those assessments quicker, and that's something, whether that's resource or whether that's actually a better explanation at the front line. So our intranet pages, do we need to have a better explanation to say this is what a complaint is and this is the length of times that they may take? I think that's something that I need to consider and push forward.
Yeah. And obviously the next question is really, how does this impact on complaint handling reviews?
Hi, Paul. Probably better if I take that question. So, generally speaking, I think naturally the more cases Police Scotland conclude, the more people are likely to come to PERC for a complaint handling review. That's just a kind of natural process, so to speak. To put that into context, I think you'll see from Police Scotland's quarterly report, about 30% of the overall number are deemed to be non-criminal that would progress to full complaint inquiry. So, roughly speaking, if you extrapolate it over, over a full year, you'll see over the last few years the number of complaint cases, not complaint allegations, sits about 7,500, maybe just below that. So, if we then look at it roughly as a third roughly goes to a full complaint inquiry. Now, that'll probably be sitting at about 2,500. The PERC historically gets about, on average, 250 to 70 CHR applications. So we're probably looking at roughly 10% of those cases that go through the full process ended up in the CHR application. So in terms of the backlog that is currently sitting with the PSD, you could potentially estimate that 100 CHR applications potentially are on the horizon in terms of the PERC. So certainly we need to consider the implications and, what that will mean for us, and make sure that obviously we're naturally as prepared as we can be.
Yeah, so that would be around 25 quarters, so it'd be another 50% in terms of workload.
That, yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think we'll move on then. Ilya, still with you in terms of the PERC audit.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read.
If you take it as read and give us the high level, please, that's grand.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Okay, well, I think those of you who have seen the report hopefully will agree that quite a balanced report, and we've identified quite a number of areas where there has been positive improvements made in terms of the six-stage process. And perhaps it's important to highlight those. Generally, we examined a cohort of almost 70 files from Q2 of the last financial year. We've excluded all cases that have been resolved through frontline resolution, or those that have been withdrawn or abandoned, and focus solely on the cases that progressed through the full six-stage process. We found that there's been improvement in terms of accessibility. We see that appropriate steps are being taken to ensure that complaint process is accessible as possible to members of the public, the representative, and the third-party complainers. We also, from the cohort that we looked at, 80% of files, complaint files, were allocated to inquiry officer of a higher rank than the subject officer. So again, that's good practice. And in all of the files that we've examined, we did not identify any potential actual or perceived conflicts of interest. So again, that provides a good reassurance of integrity and independence of the complaint process. Going further, in terms of the determinations, we found that 88% of files correctly applied balance of probabilities test, where that was appropriate, and thereafter correctly recorded that on the complaint handling form. More importantly, we found that almost 90% of complainers received a formal response letter which was free of legal jargon or technical jargon, and the determinations were clearly explained and also contained sufficient information about the inquiries that were undertaken. So again, some good practice there. Reassuringly, quite a significant number of cases we looked at contained a mixture of criminal and non-criminal allegations, and reassuringly, all criminal allegations have been subject to a referral to Crown or PERC for assessment. So again, that was good. In terms of complaint categorizations, 96% of files we looked at correctly identified all relevant complaints submitted by the complainer, so that was good. And we agreed with categorization of the complaints in 75% of the files. There are, of course, areas for improvement that we've identified. Timescales, obviously, those have moved on somewhat from the Q2 of last year. During our audit, we looked at 22% of cases being concluded within 56 days of receipt. So, and the average end-to-end time scale that we looked at was 222 days. I think more concerning perhaps was our findings in relation to communication with complainers. When we examined the files, we found that in 53% of cases, there's been no contact with a complainer following the initial contact with the NCARU for initial assessment. So what that means is that once the NCARU undertook the assessment and the case was thereafter allocated to the inquiry officer, there's been no contact between the inquiry officer and the complainer. So that's something that obviously we've highlighted to try to improve that, because in 56% of cases, we've noted that no statement or account was noted from the complainer, and in 65% of cases, no heads of complaints has been agreed. So that's probably an area where we're looking for a significant improvement, and that's something that we've highlighted through the practitioners forums, so that irrespective of the implementation of a recommendation, we're trying to make sure that we take some action as quickly as we can. A couple other areas in terms of key findings. Some inconsistencies in terms of record keeping, in terms of filling out the 6-stage complaint handling form. You'll note from the findings of the Encaro audit last year that the form has been subject to some work and revision. I know that the revised form, which is much more user-friendly and reduces a lot of duplication, is currently being worked on, and I understand that it should be implemented in the near future. But currently, looking at the findings of our audit, I think because of a tricky layout of the current form, there are quite significant inconsistency across the regional PSD hubs in terms of how the form is being completed. The quality assurance is another area where we think there is room for improvement. Some areas demonstrated really good level of quality assurance by inspector or chief inspector signing off final letters, but there are other areas where there was very limited information recorded in terms of the quality assurance process. So again, that's something that we've highlighted and looking to try to strengthen through our recommendation. Finally, the last area I wanted to highlight is in terms of the learning, in terms of communication of learning and cascading learning to the divisions, to the subject officers, and so on. Again, there is probably a little bit of room for improvement there, slightly different practices involved, but ultimately we want to strengthen the process to make sure that there is a robust process for cascading and communicating learning to the divisions, to the officers who are subject of the complaint, or maybe simply being witness complaint, but learning nonetheless is identified. So, so that's probably a brief overview of our audit report. There are 10 recommendations that made in the report. I understand the Professional Standards Department identified the Chief Inspector to progress those recommendations. Indeed, we have a meeting scheduled this afternoon to start working on the implementation. And so, yeah, we will hopefully be able to provide some updates to the committee in the future in terms of the progress of the recommendations.
Well, yeah, thank you very much indeed. And that's a helpful audit. I think it's interesting in terms of some of the conversations we've had today about engagement with complainers, but in terms of the use of the balance of probability, you're seeing 80%, 88% you agree with, you're content with the way the criminal allegations are held. So that's reassuring. And I always think it's helpful to have learning and improvement there. So there's clearly information here that will help and guide Police Scotland in terms of making their complaint system investigation better and more robust. So thank you very much indeed for that. When do we think we'll receive the reports? I don't know whether that's you or ACC Houston. Is that a Scotland question? When will we receive a response to the audit with an action plan?
Helen has reliably. Oh, sorry, Kate's going to step in with an answer.
No, I was just going to kind of come in. Obviously, Elia's touched upon it's CI Rossi and one of my team that's going to be progressing the 10 recommendations. So a kind of very early update is that we're probably at 90% satisfied that we would be able to get potentially three of those discharged. Elia might disagree when he has the meeting with Ross later. One of them is already discharged, and we'll look to produce and bring a report to the next meeting with that update in terms of where we're at with it. But just by way of reassurance, we've got a governance structure in place. Darren obviously mentioned the National Complaint Handling Development Group, which I chair currently. I also have a group that sits internally within the department, the Complaint Handling Working Group, which all of these recommendations will be monitored through, and I've also got assistance through our internal internal kind of governance audit and assurance team who will essentially kind of sense check for us in terms of the evidence that we're collating in order to discharge the recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any comments or questions from members? Satisfied and look forward to receiving the report on progress. Thank you very much indeed. That takes me on then to our committee priorities. As people probably know, the chair has asked committee chairs and committees to agree on priorities clearly, and we'll come to the work plan on our next agenda item, but looking at areas that will be shaded with slightly greater priority for committee overview and oversight. So Katrina is content with the proposals that we have here for complaints and conduct. Members, anything you want to add? Are we content with, we've seen these a couple of times now, so we're content to approve.
They look really good.
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Content to approve that. Yes. And then thank you, Katrina and Paul. Moving on to our work plan. I think that needs a bit, obviously it may have to be shaded with the objectives. Darren, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just to confirm my intention is to work with Colette and with colleagues after the meeting today to fully review the work plan to reflect kind of existing commitments and also around about planned papers on an ad hoc basis that Police Scotland, Auditor Parker and DDSP may wish to bring forward. So I will share an updated revised draft work plan at the next agenda planning meeting, if not before.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much indeed. So according to my agenda, that takes us to the end of the public meeting, unless there's anything members want to raise that we've maybe not got through that you thought you were going